Redefined is hosted by me, Zainab Salbi, and brought to you by Find Center, a search engine for your soul. Part library, part temple, Find Center presents a world of wisdom, organized. Check it out today at www.findcenter.com, and please subscribe to Redefined for free on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. What's most important about life? What is the essence of life? Is it what we do, how much we earn, how many social media followers we have? Or is it, do we live our lives in kindness to ourselves and to others? Do we live our lives in love to ourselves and to others? In nearly losing my life, I was confronted with these questions, and it led me to the conversations that make up Redefined, about how we draw our inner maps and the pursuit of meaningful personal change. Today's episode is personal, very personal, as I talk to Damien Mander, the Australian anti-poaching activist and the founder of the International Anti-Poaching Foundation. But before becoming an activist, conservationist, and even a feminist, working as a last line of defense for nature, Damien was a sniper in the Australian military, and eventually a private security contractor who worked in my own home country, Iraq, during a turbulent, deadly, and controversial period in history starting in 2005. This is one of the most heart-wrenching conversations that I have ever had, not only on Redefined, but in my life. It could only happen in truth, and that Damien gave. He showed up fully and spoke honestly without holding back about a painful passage of history that changed my life and his. Since reaching this level of truth is so rare, and since the details of Damien's transformative moments are so many, we've split this episode into two parts. The first will run this week, and the second will run next week. It is my hope that conversations like this can serve as an example of healing and reconciliation. And it is the best way I know how to honor the legacy of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu and all of his teachings about forgiveness. Join me. This conversation is not like other conversations. This is personal, this is different, this is curious, and this is about ultimately healing. For me, and I hope for you too, I trust for you too. And I want to start it with the letter you sent me, Damien, a few years back. And just to set up the context for our listeners, you and I were invited to give a presentation in Kenya. And just before we were heading off to the presentation, our travels, I live in New York, and I was getting ready to go to travel about a month before the presentation, actually. I get an email from a friend saying there's another speaker who wants to connect with you before you go to Kenya. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll connect. I actually, to be honest, I wasn't researching who else is going to be there. It was really early on for me to do any preparation. So she's connecting me with you, and suddenly, first thing, I get this following email from you. Zainab, I was a part of the system that tried to destroy your country, so I am not sure how to proceed with the conversation. It is my place in a dark history which I cannot take back or change. Just know that when we do meet in Kenya, I will speak with an open heart and the best of intentions on how we are trying to use some really shitty experiences and skills to make the world a better place for animals and those who protect them. Beyond that, I am open to learning how we can continue to evolve in all that we do. Regards, Damien. So it makes me emotional, Damien, just reading that.
Yeah,
right
me
now.
too. Yeah, it's like, well, yeah, it's a lot of stuff that comes flooding back, After that email and before it.
And that's where I want to go because to set the context, I am from Iraq. I It's painful to see my country and everything in my memory destroyed. The house I grew up in became an execution center right after the invasion of Iraq in 2003 for a year and a half, then a brothel, and then a military base. And then it's nearly got destroyed, and now I don't recognize it at all. But honestly, more than the house and all that my family once had, it's the destruction of the country, just to drive in different parts of the country and to see it, all the memories, to see it destroyed, towns, villages, churches, mosques, schools, everything is destroyed. And so it's very painful. I mean, I'm sorry I'm crying, but it's a very painful experience to witness such memories destroyed. And I had to reconcile with that. I mean, the pain doesn't go, but the reconciliation with myself, the fact that I live in America, a country that really led to that destruction, the fact that I in this country and in a world that has contributed to that destruction, right? And in a country that, in my own native country, Iraq, that has also contributed to that the destruction. As my aunt says, she said America caused half of it, or the international community caused half of it, and we caused the other half, and we're all in that process together. But the letter from you, first tell me, why did you write it? What is the context? Who were you in that war?
Yeah. So I mean, I knew our lives were on a collision course to meet, and some things you can say at the time, other things you just need to get down on paper or in writing, and just to take your time to think about it and measure. Because if I'd come to you the first time we turned up there and I said what I wanted to say, I probably wouldn't have got to say half of what I needed to say, even though it's not a long letter. So that when we did meet, you knew my position, that I was open. The shields of armor had come down, and I was exposed to learning and being able to understand what a mistake is, and to learn from it and to turn it into something good, and know that you're part of that journey. So.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate you sending the letter because, again, I didn't know, right? And I really do appreciate it was, for you to reach out in advance and all the reasons that you just mentioned. And I also appreciate that it was a courageous letter to write, But I'm curious. So let's start, if we may. Let's deconstruct the process. First of all, what role did you play in that war? Why were you in Iraq? In what capacity?
So I served. So I started in the Australian military. I was a clearance diver in the Australian Navy. So that's Australia's version of it was closest we have to the SEALs. After September 11 attacks in New York on America, the Australian government formed a Black Roles, a very small niche special operations unit called Tactical Assault Group East. And I served with the TAG, a unit of 3 platoons. I was in sniper platoon there, and I served my time there. And then Iraq was really ramping up. The insurgency was really rising. The beginning of 2005, and Australia is a very well-paid military, by the way, but not as well paid as being a private contractor or a mercenary in Iraq. And with the CV or resume I had from the units I'd served in, the most elite in our military, and some of the most elite units in the world, I could command a very high salary or paycheck in Iraq as a private contractor. And so that's why I went there. I went over there initially working, doing close protection for Australian diplomats. And then I got involved with a group, an organization called BLP, and they were tasked by the Iraq Ministry of Interior and the US government under the CPAT, Civilian Police Assistance Training Team, to recruit, train, equip, and deploy battalion-sized groups of initially national police, to replace. But aside from going to Iraq in the first place, is what I would say is the biggest mistake of the Iraq War. Disbanding the Iraqi army and the Iraqi police overnight was an absolute disaster.
But before we go any further, Damien, so I want to like step back and go into what made you decide to even join the Australian army, right? Like, let's just go back to that beginning.
So you probably won't believe this, Zainab, but growing up, I was a naughty little shit. And so we discovered one day that the fishermen down at the wharf, I was about 13 at this time, the fishermen down at the wharf, they're losing their fishing lures. And these were the calamari or squid fishermen. So they lose their fishing lures. They get stuck on something on the bottom while they're fishing overnight. And, these things are expensive, $20-30. So if we go to either the hardware store or the fishing store and steal fishing lures, we can go down and sell them to the fishermen. And so, I dived in, trying to look around, and every one of these things we're selling back for $5. Some days we get 30 or 40 of these lures. So that's how it started. I left school. I was voted the most likely to end up in prison after school.
Wow. What does that mean? I mean, like, how bad? What you did?
Yeah. Look, there was a time there where my friends were either dead, going into witness protection programs, or in prison. And I made it out. I made it out. Drugs were a big issue in my life growing up, for the people around me and eventually myself. And, I just got lucky. I really did. I just got out by a hair and joined the Navy. And, I went through what do you guys call BUDS, Hell Week, with your SEAL team selection. So we call it CDAT, Clearance Diver Acceptance Test. So it's 12 days of getting, at the time it was between 1 and 2 hours sleep a day, and just literally stripped bare as a human, as an individual, in terms of suffering, to face who you are and what you want to do. And most people don't pass that course.
Wow. How old were you?
I was 19, 20.
20.
19 when I joined the Navy, 20 when I did that the selection program.
Was there anything that, pushed you to that? Not to the joining the Navy, pushed you to being voted as the most likely person to go to prison in high school?
I think it was like I was 6 or 7 and my parents separated for the first time, and Mum moved away. And we went to a new school, and I got beaten up every day. Every single day, and I used to come home with no buttons on my shirt, and I was just like sitting there, like cuts and bruises. And I just turned to this person. I said, "No, I'm never going to let this happen again." And so I just became this like animal, it's like this, and it just stayed with me. And I was always, and then it grew into a persona that I felt I had to continuously fulfill. But to take it back to, my upbringing, I was raised as the son of a publican. We grew up in hotels with drugs, all-night parties, organized crime, bare-knuckle bar fights. That's what I grew up in. For the first almost 10 years of my life, that was what I was surrounded by. Mum left Dad when I was 7, got back a year later. And then, just before I turned 10, everything was lost. And we ended up, like, almost overnight moving to Melbourne, 1,000 kilometers away. And so in a way, into hiding, away from the organized crime side of things that had become a fairly dark shadow over our lives. And it was actually refreshing for me as a kid just to be able to grow up with kids then, and not just be growing up in a pub, in a hotel. It was just like a constant nightclub. Then once you're in the military, you're surrounded by, in these units, you're surrounded by a bunch of people who have, a similar mindset. You're surrounded by a bunch of like silverback gorillas. They're a bunch of alphas.
Mm-hmm. I know you have lots of tattoos, Damien.
Yeah.
Some are very intriguing ones.
Yeah.
I know. If I remember, and ladies and gentlemen, I only know because at dinner at the retreat that we were all speaking at one point, we were all laughing and talking and all of that. And Damien told us about his tattoos and showed it to us. And it was wow. I remember skeletons. I may be wrong, but I remember like what is in front of your chest. You tattooed something in front of your chest. And I'm
Yes.
curious about
Yeah.
that tattoo. And I'm curious about when did you have it and why did you have it?
Yeah, I had that. So it says seek and destroy. You can even have a look if you want. Go.
Seek and
Seek
destroy.
and destroy. And that's
That's intense.
yeah, it is. It's hugely intense, and it took me a decade to grow into it. After getting it, I got it when I was I think I was just like 20. I just passed the acceptance test to go on and train to be a Navy diver, and so this was just this shield of machoism that I'm just building up around myself, this masculinity that I thought, you can create by adding tattoos and stuff. And I think in a lot of ways, when people get tattoos, they sort of have to live out their own story of the ink they've got carved into themselves. And I was definitely like, it's hard to get this tattoo like Seek and Destroy and not be that person for at least the next decade until you're old enough to understand what life's about. And that's like it really sort of fueled a persona that I wanted to create to protect myself initially, and then wanted to create to keep fulfilling the prophecy. And it took me I got that. I haven't really achieved anything in the military at that stage other than passing selection. And then you're going onto these courses with like hard men that had experienced combat and a lot more life than what I had at that time. And they see this young kid with Seek and Destroy on his chest, and you attract a lot of attention. I drew the crabs, as we say. A lot of extra attention during these courses that I was going through, and these are tough courses. And then you got all these tough instructors now looking over your shoulder through the Navy and then in special operations. And if anything, I made things a whole lot harder for myself. But in making it harder for myself, I also made myself harder by being able to live up to that and deal with all that shit. So, and now I'm sort of in this position. You know me now. I've actually come, it says close to 180 degrees of what a person could probably come, which I'm happy about and I'm proud about, because I can speak to a different audience. I can speak to the person I used to be, the hunter, the sniper, the hothead teenager, the bar fighter, the angry kid, and speak to them as a conservationist, as a vegan, as a feminist, and as someone who's my whole life is trying to do something constructive, and it's not as a form of redemption. It's just because I've actually realized what the right thing to do is.
I gotta tell you, Damien, it's the sniper that scares me, right?
Yeah.
I grew up fearing soldiers, right? I grew up in war. I know people who did not grow up in war don't have an encounter with soldiers except for parades, perhaps, or whatever. I live in America, and a lot of Americans, that's what I understand, the heroes, but it's far away, and it's an image that is far away. I grew up in war, and so soldiers were right there in front of you. And I also grew up in a time where, I grew up in a dictatorship, and I remember hours and hours and hours of my childhood TV, the government would show us images of dead Iranian soldiers killed by Iraqi soldiers, right? And that was our national TV, the only station we had. So there's no other choice. And, if you want to turn on the TV, and if to turn it off is you're seen unpatriotic. So I really feared soldiers all my life. And it's not only the person, I would see small things. I feared soldiers' boots. It always would give me the shiver, because there's something rough about the appearance, the clothes, the intimidating. Yeah. And with all of that, of course, I worked in wars, but I worked despite of my fear of soldiers. I gotta tell you, I always would am I gonna be raped? Am I gonna be killed? Am I gonna be tortured? I had this reaction until I read a book called The Good Soldier by David Finkel that just changed my own understanding of soldiers and honestly, Damon, I read it before I met you, and it helped a lot in our own conversation and what I consider our own healing relationship with each other. But sniper, for me, is a different level. It's a born to it's a born to kill kind of like you're not born to kill, seek and destroy person, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just it's scary. So what led you to be a sniper, and what was the worst thing you have done?
Yeah, look, I can't go into stuff that would still be unable to speak about, not on a personal level. And I think I'm being quite open here. In Iraq, I wasn't working as a sniper. I was working as a private contractor. Yeah, there was conflict from time to time. I wasn't over there working as a sniper. I was working as a sniper with the Australian military as part of that special operations unit, which did not deploy to Iraq. But the stories of what other people had been doing in Iraq, was shitty, really shitty. I know stories of people, hear stories of people just shooting civilians just to check if their rifle shooting straight. Like it's horrendous. It's horrendous. And I absolutely honest in saying I went there to make money, but in making money, I was also not going to be part of some of the organizations that were over there, like the Blackwaters that were going around. Like, and I'll say this, and I know there's Blackwater guys sitting there. I don't give a fuck if they shit on me for it. They're fucking cowboys on the road, like absolute cowboys, like dickheads. They're having like dickheads driving around and shooting shit up, and the world's seen those news stories. I work for organizations that are extremely professional, much more so than that. Whatever they want to come and say about me, say to me, I don't care, because I was there, I saw how they behaved, cruising around the green zone. You got a guy pointing a 50 cal at you when you've unloaded your weapons and stuff, and they're pointing a 50 cal at your head because you're driving too close to their convoy. Once you're inside the green zone, inside a compound, it's like, dude, chill out, anyway. But even like in the early days there, when the security industry was really kicking off, you're having security companies having shootouts with each other. It was the Wild West. So I can honestly, like with my hand on my heart, say like there's nothing that I did that I wouldn't do again. And the money I made when I was working over there was a shitload of money. Some years, the biggest year I had there was about $240,000 tax free in the bank. Converted back into Aussie dollars at the exchange rate for the time was a hell of a lot of money towards a property portfolio. The things I take away from Iraq are lessons. There's still some people that have not grown out of the mindset of who they were then and there doing the wrong shit. And, you still, those people still come into peripherals from time to time, and they're still that person. And I'm grateful to have people around me in my life that have helped me or encouraged me to be able to take those shitty lessons and turn them into something constructive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very much interested in the story forward. But before we go there, I do want to ask you a few questions on these moments, because I recently saw The Kingsman. It's a movie that is just out, and there's a line in it says, when you in war, and when in that shooting in war that happens, when you kill someone in war, something gets lost in you, like something gets killed in you. And so I'm curious, Iraq or no Iraq, it doesn't matter, what was lost in you in that process of being in the army, again, part of the Australian army or part of a contractor? Anything got lost in you in that process?
Yeah, don't test me on this, because I've got a bit of a goldfish brain, so my Arabic is pretty sloppy these days. But I at 27, I got the job of project manager at the Iraq Special Police Training Academy, because when I went there, everyone's like, fucking sand niggers and this and that, and it was just fucking, these are Arabs, and I was like, no, fuck, like, we're in their country. And I made an effort to learn the language, and I made an effort to learn the culture, and I sat every night. I sat during the day. I drank tea. you know, I sat at night and ate dinner with these, you know, staff. You know, I learned their kids' names. I learned their parents' names, their wives' names. There wasn't one person that I built a friendship with that hadn't had something significant happen to them. And when I say something significant, like one of their kids killed on the way to school, or a wife missing a leg from a roadside bomb, or a father that, you know, he's got to get home from work from a nurse because he's got a stray bullet from a firefight while the father was going to the market. And when there was a Sunni general that took over the base in Adamir, he got there, and it was a very tense time. You know, Adamir is also very close to Sada city there, a Shiite stronghold in northern Baghdad. And I was the only person that could speak to him in a broken way in his own language. He's like, I only want to deal with that person. And I was a kid at the time. And then I was like pushed up as into like the leader of this. I had no qualifications worthy of being in that role, other than the being able to speak to someone on a human level. And that really was all that it took. Was just be able to speak to someone on equal terms as a human, and not as like a contractor or a foreigner or a white guy and an Iraqi or you know, whatever, however you want to separate it or whatever. It was just like, you know, who are your kids? What are they doing? And, you know, and he'd ask me, you know, about my parents and my family back in Australia, and we sit there and we swap pictures and sit there and, you know, a general and a kid from Australia sit there and just talk about the world, and not even talking about Iraq or Baghdad or the war or whatever. We're just talking about the world and the things that mattered to us. And you know, and I suppose in a way I was starting to learn a lot about the world at the same time, and just you know, how to treat people and how to right from wrong in a way, and good from bad, and you know, just seeing it, being surrounded by it. You know, it's very easy to point a finger at it when it's happening around you all day in every direction. But when you experience it on a personal level and conversation and sitting around the table and explanation, you know, and I think Mark Twain summarizes it so well. He says travel is lethal to prejudice, and it really is. And you know, in a way, there's colonels and generals that I can't remember the names of that showed me the world just by sitting around drinking tea with them.
You know, I mean, people who are listening to us won't be able to see me, but I am crying. Because it's, you know, like the way that war was discussed. It's not only this war, that war, you know, the Iraqi, it just happens to be my culture, so it's close to home, but all the wars, and that war particularly was engagement of the international community along with Afghanistan, as opposed to other wars, which the international community had nothing to do with it. But there was like there's a dehumanization of the people, you know, like the way it's discussed in the media is sort of like these thugs, you know, they didn't say sand nigger, but you know, they terrorists, and it's just like it steals away this, like it's an insult to the soul, you know. It's because it dehumanizes you, you know. It dehumanizes, oh, those people, you know, they blow themselves up for their, you know, cause, or they send their kids to die. And it's like, when you say these things, or they hate us, they just inherently hate us, it's, you're just completely take away the humanity of the others. And you know, and as you just shared, these are people, you know, and with stories and with hearts and with narratives and with pains and with, and I constantly, every time the media would hear me on American national news, I would say, why do they hate us? You know, why do the Iraqis hate us? And it's like, there is no hate, there's pain. You know, there's really pain because you did help control, you know, destroy the country, and you did, you know, contribute to screwing up the whole entire Middle East. So there's a lot of pain, but there's also love, you know, and curiosity, and there's like, oh my God, and we want to know you, and we want to, you know, get to know you, and all of these things, and they're both true. but it's not coming out of just dehumanize hate, it's coming out of a story. I remember one time, Damien, I used to work in Iraq, right, as a humanitarian. This is a profound, do you understand? This is a profound conversation I'm having here. A humanitarian with a private contractor in the Iraq war. And I remember going to visiting some families and whose homes were raided by U.S. soldiers in the middle of the night, and knocked the doors out and destroyed the doors and, raided the whole thing and, jumped on opened the doors of the bedroom, and the husband and the wife were sleeping next to each other. And, and that and they arrested the husband, and they were telling me, and then they, put the husband in this camp and for a few days, and there was no water and there's very shitty food and the whole thing. And then I'm meeting with the family, and this family was against Saddam, right? And they're like, listen, we understand these soldiers are trying to do their jobs. We understand they are trying to figure out something and get safety and peace and security in the country. But we understand, we're not even judging them for raiding our homes. Okay, fine, this is part of the war. But can you please tell them that this is, there is a line. There is a line for us. And the line is, if you destroy our door because you're raiding it in the middle of the night, we don't have money to fix it. And if you're going to knock out the door and just open on our private bedroom between our husband and a wife, this is our culture and our religion, our privacy. You can't do that. We understand you need to raid the house, but can you please tell them there is a limit in here? And and it makes sense for me, right? Their request was not unreasonable, very reasonable. So I crossed the street, and there was a US base and some soldiers, and I went and asked them. I was like, guys, listen, this is what these Iraqis are just saying. They're not even they're being trying to understand you here, but can you have a line in here? And they're like, ma'am, sorry, this is what we have been told, and we need to do that. And I'm like, did anybody teach you anything about the culture? Do you have any understanding, any, crash course on the culture? And they're like, no, we were giving Iraqis for Dummies. That's the book, just Iraqi culture for dummies. So my question for you, Damien, was there, you described your own personal curiosity. Was there any awareness, clarity, discussion between you and your other fellow soldiers, of contractors or whatever, whether it's Australians or Americans, it doesn't, about, let's just try to understand what's going on? Or was there not?
When a lot of us, when we go over, they're just kids, especially the boys. Well, we are still boys. You haven't evolved yet. You haven't matured, and you've come from a background of being in the military, and there's this indoctrination of mission and this tight unit, and in my case, all male units. This boys' club of just programmed to do that, seek and destroy. And it's very hard to come up to 30,000 feet and have a look down with perspective when all you're doing is down with pointy elbows fighting in the weeds, And I think for a lot of us, that's what becomes the problem when you do get that maturity and you do get that breathing space, and then you don't have the mission, you don't have the group around you anymore, the brotherhood, and all of that combines into this, what for many people becomes post-traumatic stress. And it's like, fuck, what have I been a part of? What have I done? What was I doing? I've got no mission. What's my purpose? And I think that's the big thing. What's my actual purpose? I've just spent this section of my life doing what I thought was purposeful, and now I'm here trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, and I don't have any support network around me. I've got a wife or a girlfriend that doesn't understand who I was and what I've been through, or family that can't understand who I am now.
I was one of the first humanitarians to have gone to Iraq after the invasion, right? It was a small plane 6 people in it only. The plane was made in 1969, the year I was born, and I was very scared. It was 2 weeks after the actual fall of Baghdad, and I was very scared to go back into my own home country with a new story, And I go, and the airport is familiar space for me because my father was the head of Iraqi civil aviation. And I go and I see the airport, all of it, US military planes and ally planes and all of these things. And it's very intimidating. And there's a lot of destruction, destroyed planes. It was very intimidating moment for me. And I was shaking. And there was a captain, US captain, processing, making his own procedures to understand who's entering the country. I mean, if you remember, there were no border controls, there was chaos. This guy just did it on his own, had his own sheets to say who's entered, what day, what's your affiliation, what's your passport number. His own, he made up the procedures because there were no instructions. So he's asking everyone and writing their names, and he says, who is with Women for Women International? Because that's sort of the leisure says that. And I'm like, I am, but I'm scared. And I can take back the plane and go back to Jordan where I came from. I was so scared. I was so scared if they know I knew Saddam Hussein, maybe they will, connect me to him, which I had nothing to do with him. But I had all these fears, right? And the guy, the captain, I'm going to call him because I don't have his permission to reveal his name, pulled his arms from me and shook mine and says, welcome to this country. This country needs you. He didn't know I'm from Iraq. He had saw me on the Oprah Winfrey show helping women survivors of wars. And he had contributed with his wife to Women for Women. And when he said, welcome, this country needs you, he was like, we need your help in helping women and rebuilding the lives of people. So we became friends. I mean, we became in dialogue and in conversations like we are right now, right? And the reason I'm mentioning him is because I stayed in touch with him. When he came back to the States, I invited him over for dinner, all of that. And he told me a story, Damien, that never left me. He said, I can tell you things that we have done some shit in Iraq, and he talks about in his brigade, he's like, we were one of the first wave to enter Baghdad. And there was a small part of the city, and we were in the tank, and the commander said, throw cluster bomb on that part of town, or a small neighborhood. And he said, we did. And the commander said, throw it again. And he said, we did again. And he's explaining what a cluster bomb for me, which I don't understand. Yeah, I didn't know what it is. It's just basically a bomb that goes into a million other bombs, basically. And this has a multiple effect. It's not one location. It has multiple locations that it lands on. And you're going to correct me when what is a cluster bomb. But then he said, we threw it again. And the commander said, again. And he said, we did it again. 4th time, again. And he said, at this point, we turned to the commander and was like, this is a lot. I mean, we're done. I mean, we threw enough cluster bombs. And he said, again. And by the way, my father was in Iraq during that war, and he was in a shelter, and a bomb fell on them. And obviously he's alive, thank God, but it's just shaken because of it. And the captain and the commander said, again. And he said, the 6th time he commands us to throw or to, launch cluster bombs on this one neighborhood, one street, like that was enough. And he said, Zainab, he looks at me and he said, at that point, we committed a massacre. The 6th time, that was a massacre. That was not being in the army. And he said, I could never say that in public because we are told never to tell of the things that we have done, because I will betray my fellow soldiers and if I say it, but I am telling it to you. So my question, what was the worst you have witnessed in your service? And in Iraq, but in your service? That was a turning point for you.
I remember going through Babel and just, like one of the Babylon, and just seeing it flattened, and just thinking this is part of the cradle of civilization, and I'm part of a very small cog in a big machine that has been a part of just destroying that and the country and culture that built it, and all for resources in the ground and the arguments of old men. We're just the smallest of pawns in just a big old game, and a game that didn't take into consideration all the victims. And I was part of that machine, and not something I'm proud of. Not something I even had perspective or a lens through which to see it properly at the time. It was just, you just drummed into you. I won't say brainwashed, but it's, you just programmed to do and be a part of this machine. And, I thought, it's almost like kids you shouldn't be able to join the army until a certain age, when you have perspective and life experience and have matured, and then maybe things would be a whole lot different.
So how did you do that? I mean, what was the moment in which you said to yourself, I'm out, I'm done, and I'm leaving?
It was, we were on a mission in northern Baghdad, and I'd done very well financially by this stage, and I'd finished doing the training with the Iraqi Special Police Training Academy, and so I was working for a company called Aegis on Project Matrix, working with the US Army Corps of Engineers. So we were doing short and long range reconnaissance across the country, looking at major infrastructure that had been destroyed, and we were deploying from Baghdad each time. So whether it was all the way down south or all the way up in, past Erbil, we would go by road, and our job was to go in and look at this major infrastructure, hospitals, schools, power plants, go in and talk to the locals from a security aspect, while the Corps of Engineers would discuss with them on a bricks and mortar aspect what it would take to rebuild these areas. Now, these areas have been, these infrastructure have been blown up because they've become, or suspected to become, insurgency strongholds. And so, we're on a mission. I can't remember the exact month, but it was on, I think, my second last rotation. I think I did 12 or 13 rotations over there.
How long is each rotation?
For the shortest one I did was 2 weeks. The longest was 6 months. So any window in between that. And then, we went through a checkpoint, and like our convoy was blown up going through the checkpoint. It killed a couple of Iraqi security guards or police officers that were at the checkpoint as we're going through. And as we pushed through, we were surrounded quite quickly by like a local Mahdi army militia, and mixture of militia and rogue police and military officers. And it's like, this is, I had a Dushka anti-aircraft gun held to my head, and I was like, shit, now this is it. Okay, this is how it ends. They're trying to pull guys out of the turrets of the other vehicles, and it's like, okay. And then the US Army Rangers came in and got us out of there and got us back to a base. So I went and took leave, and like leave for me, so I was single for most of the time, and so leave for me is, every time, like, it's just, you go wild when you get out, and you go wild when you're about to go back in, because this is either you've just made it, or like, shit, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And so I remember going out after that leave and just really the wheels were starting to come off, and I was becoming complacent on my missions and operations and stuff. And then going back in, I remember on my last rotation, and I came out just before the end of 2017. I remember we had a bunch of missions to do on Christmas Day. And, of course, business as usual in Iraq. and having to do missions on Christmas Day. And I thought, fuck, if I get killed on Christmas Day, it's going to spoil Christmas for my mum for the rest of her life. But I got out of there a few days later, and that was it. Yeah, it's just, financially, I didn't need to be there. Mentally, I wasn't there. Emotionally, I was done. It was time. It was time to turn the page.
So, as I understand it, that you left, and then that led you to a trip. As I understand it, you took a year off and traveled the world. And tell me what happened in that year. What were you looking for? What were you trying to accomplish? What did you do in that year?
So I was quite well off financially at this stage. I wasn't even 30 at the time, and I had 2 apartments in Dubai, and I had 5 houses in Australia. I didn't own them all outright, but I had paid a lot of most of them. So I was in a pretty good position, and so I was just, I've done well. I've served in some of the most elite military units. I've survived 3 years in Iraq. So it's okay. I'm going to take I'm going to give myself a reward, and that was a holiday that started in South America, in Buenos Aires, and finished 11 months later in Panama, and it just became huge. Like, it started off awesome and just partying and drugs and alcohol, but you keep that up. You go from being always on in these units and being trained, and then going out and, for whatever reason, you had mission and purpose and the unit around you, and then all of a sudden it's not there. You go from being always on to completely off, not only off, but out of it. So I just, it was a rapid downward spiral for me. And, the deeper and faster you go, the more acceleration it gains in terms of its momentum, where you're going. And just, cocaine and all night drinking binges, they go for 3 days, not all night. That's a Monday. Just crazy, wild shit. And not using your brain. You've got nothing to think about other than, where's your next score coming from, and who you're going out to drink with for the next couple of days.
So what was it that led you to stop after this 1 year of partying, or numbing yourself, or decomposing, or releasing? Was it falling in love? Was it trying to see what I'm gonna do now for a living? What was it? What was the question that says, okay, it's time to stop?
I mean, yeah, like I didn't necessarily need to work. So I had this, I had a layer of financial security there to go and explore. And deep down, I sort of always understood or knew that I would find where I'm supposed to be in travel in the world. Nothing against home. I always knew my place wasn't at home. Not to be running away from anything. It was just, home for me just seems secure. And I think that's the thing I'm most afraid of, is being secure and in comfort. I wanted to be challenged, and I wanted to have adventure. And I would say there was up until the early years of my conservation career, I would have considered myself selfish, self-centered. I joined the military for adventure. I went to Iraq to make money, and when I came to Africa, I was looking for a fight, not a cause. It was adventure. There was nothing really noble or good intentioned about my arrival in Africa. It was a 6-month journey. Yeah, I mean, after you've done the shit that I'd done at that stage, being our version of the SEALs, being as a special ops sniper, being in Iraq, being in South America, partying it up, there's very little you can sort of do to impress people. And I'd heard about anti-poaching years before in some barroom chat, and it sounded like a cool adventure. So yeah, and that had sort of sat at the back of my mind for a while. And I think it was South America that brought that option to the surface, maybe as the next adventure, maybe as an opening door, or maybe it's just as a way to get an excuse to get out of South America, where I'd already hit rock bottom, and arrived in Africa and just started, working my way around, seeing different operations, different national parks, what was going on, speaking to rangers. And okay, and offering my services and getting closed doors everywhere. And looking back now, and I get an email a day in some instances, sometimes from people who are just like I was, that want to come over with their own sniper rifles and automatic weapons and go and hunt poachers. And I can speak to the person I used to be in that circumstance, because I remember what it was like, the look in the people's eyes when you come over saying, yeah, I'm here, I've got all this experience. And here you've got someone who's spent 2 or 3 decades building a career in conservation and good relationships with local communities. And then you've got some hothead kid that wants to come in and go out and hunt poachers, and it's just for all the wrong reasons. I mean, it was all part of really steering me into the right direction. You need to be shut down. You need to be told no. You need to be, I think, forced into a corner where you have to figure things out for yourself. I'd say my early the first year in Africa definitely, well, it shaped me from being over here into an adventure to actually wanting to do something long lasting. And then the subsequent years after that shaped me from thinking what I thought was right into what I now know is right. And I come from a military background. And when I first came over here, conservation was becoming increasingly militarized. And of course, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. So you fall into cadence with that side of conservation, which was this militarized type of conservation against local communities that, of course, live on the boundaries of the areas you're trying to protect. You've got elephants and rhinos being hunted towards extinction from these, small armed militia type units that are crossing international borders to come in and hunt these animals for the value of their tusk and their horn. A rhino horn is selling for $35,000 a pound. And a rhino can easily have 20 or 30 pounds on its snout. So you've got something that should be locked up in a safe, running around an area the size of a small country, and being hunted by these groups. And so, yeah, there was a place for me at the time, but I just didn't realize how what I thought my place would evolve over time to where we are now.
How did it happen?
Yeah, it took us 7 years actually to figure out what we do as an organization. So over those initial months, it took me 6 months to find a start, like an organization that would accept me and say, okay, yeah, you can come out and do some work with these rangers. And so I started working with the rangers and living with them and patrolling with them. And there's a group of guys out here in the middle of nowhere that had hardly any resources. They were motivated. They just lacked basic training. They lacked basic resources. And most of all, they lacked any form of attention or acknowledgement for what they're doing. And I just come from working within a $600 billion a year annual defense budget in Iraq. We had anything we wanted at any time of the day. Any piece of equipment. We had drones trying to bring us home safely at night. We push a button. We've got military units coming to pull us out of the shit when shit goes down. And then you come over here and we're looking after oil in the ground. And then you come over here and you see these guys looking after the heart and lungs of the planet, and they got nothing. And you're like, okay, all right, there's something here. And alongside what was happening with that, it was happening at the same time. Now, I was never allowed to touch guns growing up. And so, of course, the day I turn 18, I go and get my gun license and buy a rifle, and I start hunting. And I never hunted again after Iraq because I knew what it was like to be hunted and to hunt something that would shoot back. And so I had this, in a way, I was sort of trying to, as a teenager in early 20s, trying to fulfill some form of male primal respect. I'll get that from my peers. It's just bullshit. It's like the most blatant form of insecurity, and to fill that insecurity, you take it out on the most vulnerable. So Iraq had given me this, a different lens through which to see the world, and I'd never viewed animals the way that I viewed them when I arrived in Africa. We grew up with dog, a German Shepherd growing up, and that was like the closest I ever come to an animal or having compassion for animals. And so then I was seeing all the work that these rangers are doing, leaving their families behind for up to 11 months of the year out there working for a couple of $100 a month. I'm getting paid $250,000 a year. And I was just like, okay, these guys are committed, and seeing what was happening to the animals that they were trying to protect, it did. It affected me. And then there was two particular incidents. One was seeing a buffalo, a female Cape buffalo, like one of the most powerful and dangerous animals. The buffalo in Africa on foot is a buffalo. And seeing one of these animals, she had a back leg caught in a wire snare. And the rangers, when we arrived there, the rangers read the ground like you or me understand the front page of the newspaper. It's a language, and they can tell how long that animal has been there and what's been going on. They're like, yeah, okay, she's been here for 3 days. And you could hear the bones crunching under her skin where she'd ripped her pelvis apart, trying to escape from this wire snare that was wrapped around her back leg that the poachers put across these paths to try and catch animals. And they wait till they're in this type of state to come in, and then they'll smash their spine with an axe, and then they'll cut their throat, and then take all the meat or whatever it may be. And this animal, this buffalo, had to be euthanized. And when she was euthanized, like this fluid started coming out, and she started to give birth to a stillborn calf. And that was a very distinctive moment in my life. And watching the rangers sit there and do an autopsy and cut the rest of the calf out, and just, it's like this animal that just was been trying to fight for freedom for so long, like willing to rip your own pelvis apart in that desperation and fear and lack of understanding of what was happening to you at the time. It was I'd say probably one of the most profound things that I'd experienced up until that point in my life. And then seeing an elephant with its face cut off, something the size of a truck, killed for something you can hold in one hand, which happens 35,000 times a year across Africa. That all that combined, this is all this stuff's just going into the blender of my emotions and thought process and purpose and what am I doing and where am I going and what's going. At the time, I had forms enrolled to go and study at Silwood Catering College. I wanted to be a chef down in Cape Town, and I was like, no, it's like this is the one thing in life I can't turn my back on. Like this is it. And I literally contacted my mum. She had a power of attorney over all my property because if I got killed in Iraq. So she was able to start selling off houses, and I set up the IAPF in October 2009. We started off as a service provider, like giving training and resources to other units. Yeah, and then
who's we? You and who else?
IAPF. Well, we started off just me, and eventually put a small board together in Zimbabwe. Then we set up a board in Australia as an organization there. My best mate, the guy that was in the car with me, came and joined me for a number of years as we scaled up. And, we started, when I left Australia, I came back from South America to Australia. When I left Australia to come to Africa, I had a one-way ticket and carry-on luggage. I did not even have a check-in bag. 12 years later, we have a portfolio of over 7 million acres, 270 staff. That'll double in the next 12 to 18 months, and running one of the protection with one of the most innovative models for conservation and law enforcement that I think exists.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's how we then end up meeting and me listening to your presentation about your organization. Now, tell me, because you mentioned earlier in the interview a few things, that you have become vegan and that you have become a feminist. Yeah. So tell me the story of why did you become vegan and why did you become a feminist?
So we were walking around protecting one group of animals all day long, having to carry arms to do that safely, and coming home and killing another group of animals because we like the taste of them. And to me, it just didn't make sense. Although it didn't make sense, I still suppressed the truth and just kept pushing it down and didn't want to acknowledge it. And it's just like I was being the master of bullshit, really, to be honest. And then I was asked to do a TEDx talk at the Sydney Opera House. I was given 6 months' notice, so it was going to be packed full Sydney Opera House to deliver a full-length TEDx talk there. And I had 6 months to prepare. And it was in the preparation of that. I was asked to talk about my work on anti-poaching, and it was in the preparation of that I went down the rabbit hole of animal agriculture and what it's actually doing to the planet. And as a concept, I signed up for conservation because I love nature and I love animals. Also, I kept saying I'm walking around the world, talking on stages, telling people how they need to look after nature and look after animals, and I'm going home and eating a steak, eating a chicken, eating a fish. I was just like, I'm a hypocrite, and the last thing I want to be in this world is a hypocrite. So when I got up to do this talk on the stage in front of the opera house, and I spoke about speciesism, about the allocation of different values and rights that we give to different species based on what their meaning to us as individuals are. And for a lot of us, that just means, how they taste. We can relate to cats and dogs because we have them as pets. We can relate to some animals because they're cute and cuddly. We can relate to elephants and rhinos because they're sexy and we like to visit them and take photos of them. And a lot of us can relate to pigs and cows and chickens and fish because we're conditioned to eat them. But the truth is that they each share the exact same capacity to suffer. And the only difference in the capacity to suffer is the difference we allow ourselves to accept in our own mind and conscience. And that the truth is a cumulative. And I was exposed to enough truth over a long enough period to eventually acknowledge that I did not want to be the person that I was anymore. And, I'd say that is something about me. When I make a decision about something, that's it. And, as they say, when the shutters come up, they never go down again.
Was it just you deciding I'm just going to tell the truth? I'm going to be in truth in myself. I'm not going to bullshit myself again. Or was it the help of a therapist, of a beloved, of an animal? I'm just curious because sometimes we need help and sometimes we just have a moment of epiphany and we're like, I'm not doing this anymore.
There was definitely mentors, although it was a one-way relationship that was being created, mentors or movies, documentaries that influenced me, watching certain speeches and one thing leads to another and you're just doing more and more. And half of it is you're like, yeah, okay, I knew this. Shit, I knew this and I didn't acknowledge it. I knew this or I pushed it to the side. I knew it, but I kept doing what I was doing because I liked the taste of something. And I just didn't want to be a part of the system anymore that is responsible for the greatest destruction of nature on this planet and the cause of more death than anything else in history. That is animal agriculture.
Now tell me about, because that's what I love about your work. That makes your work made a huge difference in my ability and willing and desire and to be in this healing conversation with you. It wasn't only the acknowledgement, which I appreciate, nor only the sharing of the story, which I really appreciate, but it also, frankly, was your work, which is, not only in the anti-poaching units and protecting animals and protecting lands and from being pillaged and abused, but also there's a fact that I'm going to invest in women. Tell me the story of how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so we're taking on bigger and bigger projects as an organization, scaling, went from being a service provider, training rangers, to then taking over security portfolios for multiple reserves, and then into some very hostile regions. Along the biggest project we got back in 2015 was along the border of Kruger National Park and Mozambique. Kruger's in South Africa and Mozambique, just across the border there. And Kruger was at the time home to about a third of the world's remaining rhino population. And we went into Mozambique as the only organization separating a third of the world's rhino and most of the world's rhino poaching syndicates that were trying to target them. And we came in very heavy-handed with this militarized ground offensive against the local population. This is where the syndicates were operating out from, and that was our job. And we had helicopters, canine attack teams, 165 personnel, 4 different government departments working there, intelligence networks and drones, military grade hardware. And I remember in 2017, we'd helped drive a massive downturn in rhino poaching, or rhino poachers coming through that area into Kruger National Park. A lot of them tried to go south and under the park and come through from the western side via South Africa. But we played a significant role in driving a downturn in that section of the park where most of the rhino were. We got a lot of kudos for it. We got a lot of recognition. But I remember sitting there saying, this is not right. What we're doing is not right. It's not the answer. It's not sustainable. And we were just having a war with the local population. And I remember reading the UN Population Division projection. It said there's going to be 2 billion people in Africa by 2040. I remember thinking we are not going to win this by having bigger fences and more guns. And it was literally a turning point for me. It's like, okay, this is great. It's working. It's stopping animals from being killed, but it's not the answer. And not having an answer is an answer. It pushes you out to try and find something else. So I remember seeing. I was doing a lot of research and sort of, broadening my perspective, I think, in trying to understand different ways of having interaction with communities. So I remember seeing a lot of research linking women's empowerment to be the single most greatest force for positive change in Africa. That for me was a foreign concept. I'd come from all male units and the ultimate boys' club of special operations. So now I'm starting to read about women's empowerment as this it seemed like a silver bullet, like this amazing tool for development in Africa. I didn't know how that was going to overlay with the work that we were doing. I see a lot of community projects, where there's cooperatives or collectives of women doing certain projects in the communities or getting certain benefits. I didn't know how it would overlay with what we were doing, conservation, which is a male-dominated industry where women are outnumbered at a ratio of around 100 to 1 in frontline field-based positions. And when women do get roles close to the front lines, they're usually stuck on a gate, stuck walking a fence, or stuck at a checkpoint, or riding a desk. So we're looking at other organizations that had integrated women into frontline conservation roles, and they were being portrayed as doing all the work, but actually held back from doing the roles that the public thought they were doing, and those roles were actually being fulfilled by men. So the question to me was, okay, so what if women could do these roles? What if they were given the opportunity to do that, and into getting the experience that they would need to rise up into management and lead operations, just as other industries had got more women into management, more women on the boards, more women into as CEOs. That just wasn't happening in conservation. Look, if we were getting it right, the situation would have been so much better in terms of us as an industry and where so many species are racing towards extinction and so much land being lost. So I said, we want to try and start an all-female anti-poaching unit, like an armed all-female anti-poaching unit. And we tried in 7 different areas. Well, no, it was 6 different areas. It's the 7th area where we actually got a start, but 7 different areas. 6 of them said, no, we don't want to take the risk. We don't want to have women doing this. This is a man's job. It's a patriarchal society. And eventually the only reason we got a start is because we chose an area that had nothing left to lose. They'd already lost everything. It was a trophy hunting area. Trophy hunting had died as an industry. There was no animals left to shoot. And we were able to do a short-term deal with the local chief and local government to come in and trial selection for what would go on to become Akashinga, or the brave ones, as they call themselves, an all-female anti-poaching unit that's become more than just an anti-poaching unit. It's become a model of conservation. Yeah, so that was the beginning of it back in August 2017. And as I say, it took us nearly 7 years to figure out what we do as an organization and who we are.
Tell me what you learned about that. I mean, I remember some of the stories you shared. You were like the men you were also training men, and this is my memory, Damien, which is the men would come and late or not always on time. The women were showing up really on time. That you were
Yeah.
choosing women who are marginalized, who are
Yeah.
divorcees or widows,
Yeah.
and had no choice. That the women were dealing with their identity and their with the guns or with the weapons in a very different way than the men were dealing with it, and they
Yeah.
were dealing with the anti-poachers and with the poachers in a different way. And so tell me more about that. What let's go there.
Yeah. So I remember we were working with an Aussie documentary maker at the time, and we were there like in the creation stages of the program, and when we were speaking to the local communities, and I remember the local communities asking, okay, so who are you looking for? And me and him, we looked at each other and we were like, well, okay, well, if this thing is going to go beyond a 3-day selection, which is what the only window they were giving us was a 3-day selection, because they thought this would fail and we would revert back to employing men. So we thought, well, if this goes beyond 3 days, which we think it might, let's give an opportunity to those that need it the most. And that's where the criteria for women that were survivors of serious sexual assault, domestic violence, AIDS orphans, single mothers and abandoned wives, and sex workers. That was the criteria for the initial candidates in a country that when I first arrived had the lowest life expectancy in the world for a woman. So it was less than 40 years of age. So yeah, and then I remember 87 women coming down for initial interviews. And still to this day, it's probably the toughest 2 days of my life listening to those 87 stories. Where these women had come from, how they'd even made it this far in life. It made me, I'd built at the time, I built a career across 3 continents in training men for combat, frontline deployment. I'd never worked with women. And I remember in our units in Australia, we had the University of Wollongong come to do a study on our unit to try and measure what it would take to integrate women into the ranks. And we remember having like a locker room vote of like, no, we'd rather make our entry standards harder physically than allow women into to work alongside us. And that was just purely ego and insecurity. So I remember listening to those 87 stories and saying, okay, I remember like feeling a lot of resentment, saying, okay, I haven't been a part of anything that's happened directly to these women individually, but I've been a part of sustaining a culture that had oppressed women just like this. And so it was quite a, I still say to this day, and I've very much become the student and remain the student in so much of where the program has gone and what it's taught me. But we started off from those 87. I think we chose 37 to start selection, and from those 37, we chose 16. Those women were as tough as anything I've seen, and they made me realize the distance that you can place between suffering and breaking is what defines the spirit or the character of an individual, and that is what we need in a ranger. We need spirit and character, and these women had that in spades. We can train the rest as long as you've got spirit and character. And it was very early in the selection process when me and the other instructors looked at each other and we're like, okay, this is real. We have to get these women ready for what they're going to face out there. They were going out into an area that had lost 8,000 elephants in the 16 years prior to us arriving.
And what do they teach you?
So the 3 things that make this program work, that make it smoke to where it is today. It's scalable. Such a growing land portfolio. The first thing is we haven't seen any corruption with the women. And Zimbabwe currently ranks, I think, 160 out of 180 countries on the Global Corruption Index. So if you can go to Zimbabwe and remove corruption from the equation of what you're doing, you're already halfway home to achieving whatever it is you're trying to do. So historically, with men, we would employ men from hundreds of kilometers away and bring them in. And we did that to avoid collusion with the communities they may have grown up with. So they were working in an area, protecting that area, and they would go home on their leave. And we'd try and minimize interaction with the local community because we knew it would lead to corruption. They'd either give out information on where elephants or rhinos were going to be or where they're going to be patrolling, and people will exploit that vulnerability in our operations. And with women, as we've scaled, we haven't had to worry about corruption. They're either really bloody good at it, or we just haven't, and we haven't seen it yet, or it's just not happening. So because we haven't had to worry about corruption, it means we can employ directly from the communities alongside the area we're trying to protect. Now, the largest line items in our budget is salaries for rangers. It makes up a massive component of what we pay out each year. So instead of that money now being distributed around the country into communities hundreds of kilometers away from the area we're trying to protect, it's now going directly into the community at household level and mostly into the hands of women. I think 62 cents out of every dollar we spend operationally is going back into the community alongside the area we protect, and 80% of that is at household level into the hands of women. So we've taken the largest line item in conservation and turned it into the most effective community development tool, which is women's empowerment. So we shifted our entire strategy on conservation. We put women's empowerment at the center of that strategy. It gives us the greatest traction in community development, and conservation became the byproduct. And we flipped the way that we look at conservation from being inside an area looking to protect it to being outside an area looking to motivate protection from the community. We understood that conservation is not a natural issue, it's a social issue. And when you deal with the social issues first rather than last, you'll have a far greater impact and a far more financially economical rate, if that makes sense. You can achieve far more with far less money. You're not having this ongoing war that requires drones and planes and military-grade hardware and canine attack teams and bigger fences and more guns and troops on the ground and all that. You're actually having something far more effective in law enforcement than biceps and bullets. You're having relationships, and that's what these women taught me. And in that lesson, that second lesson there, that the lesson of relationships versus force and power, women naturally de-escalate tension. And my background is counterinsurgency warfare. We're trained to look for a fight and finish it. Women tend to want to have a conversation with something before they blow it up, and that's very useful when you're trying to have a relationship with tens of thousands of people that live directly alongside of the area you're trying to protect. And in all of that, and the de-escalation that women bring to law enforcement, and de-escalation means demilitarization. We actually cut our operational costs by 2/3. So it freed up a massive component of our budget, which we were then able to reinvest back into the community, into water sanitation, healthcare, and education, to go alongside gender equality and job creation. And all of this has just become this formula, this evolving formula that we see as best practice. And for us is working, not only as a sustainable alternative to trophy hunting and the income that's generated for local communities, but as a way to motivate communities to see the benefit in conservation at scale. We stopped looking at as being a service provider and training rangers, and we started going into long-term contracts with local communities. We stopped looking at species, started looking at biodiversity, and understanding that when you look at biodiversity as a whole, then all the species are included. And then we stopped looking at parks as standalone parks, and we started looking at landscapes, the network, the wide open network of, which is a jigsaw puzzle of nature with multiple parks joined together. And in the case of Zimbabwe, 8 parks in our portfolio there across the mid to lower Zambezi and the Zimbabwe region of the Zambezi Valley of Zimbabwe, one of the largest and most iconic ecosystems on the continent. And the work that these women are doing seems like every dollar that is spent in community development is $1 or $2 less we have to spend in law enforcement. And this is I mean, I can sit here and say, as I said earlier, putting women into the forefront of law enforcement will change the dynamics of society for the better. And we had a blank canvas to test that on, because we went into a broken area that had nothing left. And it's not like you can go into Chicago or Detroit and you say, okay, we're gonna change out all the male police officers working in law enforcement for women and see what happens. You don't have that luxury. We had that luxury to be able to do that and see what happens and be able to measure the results. And the results have been profound, both in terms of reduction in poaching and increase in wildlife populations, and the money that's being spent in development in local communities. Women seem to use or carry a weapon as a tool, not a toy. It's not an extension of ego. In the more than 300 arrests that they've made, there's only been shots fired once. They've helped drive an almost 90% downturn in elephant poaching across the region. And at the same time, an almost 400% increase in wildlife populations. So it's working. We have a majority of the communities that are on side with what we're doing. There is still that unfortunate reality of having to carry a weapon because someday they're going to come up against people that are shooting at them. And I would love to live in a world where nature is not targeted in such a manner. So we actually have far more staff that are unarmed than staff that are armed. We have the same amount of uniformed scouts that are unarmed working in the communities as what we call community liaison officers, as we have armed rangers in the field. And then on top of that, there's all the support staff working in habitat, working in ecology, the scientists, the people that are working in development in the communities, the students. I mean, we've got hundreds of students going through now as part of scholarship programs in schools, underprivileged children. We've got nurses in clinics. We've got specialists that come in and work with the women. We've got trauma healing sessions that are happening in the communities. So there's still this, and it rightly or wrongly maybe does get portrayed as just a team of armed women out there running around protecting nature, because that is often the sexy side that the media wants to grab a hold of, and it's a small wedge of a much bigger picture.
Couple of more rapid questions. Any piece of music that you go to for inspiration or for solace?
I like to sit back with a bit of Rodriguez. And I was in the States and I went and watched the Rolling Stones' last two concerts.
Wow.
One in Austin and then one in Miami. One of our instructors, he works with us part-time when he's in Africa, but he's one of the head security guys for the Rolling Stones. So I got to go there and take a couple of donors to each concert. It was epic. It was awesome.
Fantastic. Books that you read and that really helped transform you in different ways?
I think I read a lot of Wilbur Smith growing up, which I think planted a seed for Africa. Papillon is probably my favorite book. It's just a story of struggle and survival, and I think in a way that's been the consistent thing about my life, is just never giving up. And I've never been exceptionally good at anything or better than anyone else. I've just never given up. Just been either stubborn or stupid.
What has love from family and friends taught you? What is love for you?
Love is a door to a new universe that I didn't know existed until it did. And when you do, you realize it's bigger than anything else before.
What does forgiveness means for you?
Being humble, being willing to forgive and forget, and sit and look at each other as an equal.
What is truth?
Truth is exposing yourself. It's being vulnerable. It's acknowledging. Truth is, you can bullshit anyone. You can't bullshit yourself. Being honest to yourself first.
And what does the divine mean for you? What is God? Whether it's God or whether it's the divine or whatever it is. What is that for you?
I believe there's something bigger than us. I don't know what it is. I had to research recently on the odds of us being who we are. And the odds of you being you and me being me scientifically are 400 trillion to 1. I don't believe in anything before this life. I've never been approved of anything after this life. So this is it. This is the one shot we've got to do as much as we can. We've got a handful of decades to evolve, to cut away the bits that don't work. We've got a handful of decades to do what nature's spent billions of years doing, to evolve to become the best that we can be. If there is something after this, I'll take it as a pleasant surprise. But I don't believe that there is. I believe this is it. We hit the jackpot just by being us. Don't fucking waste it.
That was Damien Mander. To learn more about his work, please visit www.iapf.org. For full transcripts of this episode, please visit www.findcenter.com. Do remember to subscribe to this podcast. It is free, and I truly would welcome your comments. You can also follow us on Instagram at find_center or follow me at Zainab'd Salbi. Redefined is produced by me, Zainab Salbi, along with Rob Corso, Casey Khan, and Howie Khan at Freetime Media. Our music is by John Palmer. Special thanks to Neil Goldman, Caroline Pincus, and Shira Johnston. See you next week for another conversation about life's turning points and lessons learned.